please welcome to the stage Professor Dr. Daniel Pauly.
As part of my education as a fishery scientist, I had to be on a vessel. And that was the peak of fisheries development in the 70s. You had a giant vessel, you went on board of a giant vessel, and I came to Canada for the first time. I boarded a German research vessel that was surveying the north of Newfoundland and the coast of Labrador and on Greenland on the other side. I was in this thing. This is a giant factory ship, like the Russian had, the East German, the Poles. Everybody was in Canada fishing with these monsters. And this ship had been converted to a research vessel, so that the fishery equipment was not used, the processing equipment, but it was used to fish at a depth of 1,000 meters, giant quantities of hard redfish and rocks, also the size of Volkswagen. Everything came on deck. We would cut up the fish and measure them and write reports. And I know that these reports were not read by anybody. That is in management. I know that now, because a few years later, the whole thing collapsed, right? After my master, after it was in 1975, I went to Indonesia, and I was supposed to, in Indonesia, I was hired in a German development project that was introducing trawling in Indonesia. The idea was the resources in the Java Sea in Indonesia need to be developed, and you assess how much it is. Say you end up with a number of 1 million tons, and I didn't know that at the time. Capacity of a boat would be maybe 50,000 tons per year, therefore you need 20 boats, or is it 200? And therefore, the Asian Development Bank would buy these boats or would subsidize the purchase of these boats. That was the first time that it was connected with policy, but I had no idea the policy was used that way. I had no idea that the biomass that we estimated would be assumed to be all fishable, that you could develop the trawl fishery and not take account of the fact that there were 100,000 fishers already there exploiting the resource that were artisanal fishers. In other words, the conflict was built in that a few years later caused Indonesia to close the fishery for small-scale fish, the trawl fishery that had just developed, because there were conflict between ethnic Chinese and ethnic Indonesian over who had access to the resource. This was naive. My work was naive and stupid, and among other things, when we fished, what we fished is habitat. We demolished the habitat of the Java Sea. We removed the bottom of it and transformed it from a really soft coral to a mud flat. The Java Sea is now a huge mud bed, and such images that where the catch consists of sponges and other bottom animals are very rare. They are extremely rare because there is only a period of 1-2 years where that happens, when you turn around the fish, the resource from a coral, actually coral reef, fauna to mud flat, a mud habitat. I realized that what was happening at the time, they had put into my head and the head of my contemporary the notion that we worked for managers, and they were, I didn't know any, and they were somewhere in the sky, and they were running the fisheries. And then we studied the fisheries, and we wrote papers that would be read by managers. And that would happen more or less automatically. You had nothing to do. You did on your fishery science. The managers would pick that up. and they would run the fisheries. You know, you can see that it was naive, but actually this was the model that was implicit in our education in the 70s and 80s. Then I returned to Germany. I worked on fish growth, and I returned. Then I quickly got a PhD, and I returned to a fishery center, and I worked a lot throughout the tropics. And basically, I learned one thing, one big thing. And I write big things always in Gothic letters. Yeah. Fisheries manager, whoever they are, do not listen to fishery scientists unless they're forced to. And the question is, who can force them to? But on their own, they don't listen. So I came to Canada in '94. The country was still reeling from the collapse of the large fishery. The story will remind you is 500 years of blue, about 100,000 to 200,000 tons, sustainably caught by traps and dories, really men on land on little boats. And the monster boat came, the one that you have seen. This was fisheries development. The fisheries, the catches moved up to 700,000 tons about a year, and the whole thing collapsed. Then Canada declared the fisheries economic exclusive zone. It was not an exclusive economic zone, but fisheries exclusion zone, and got all the foreigners out and built its own fleet. And then the own fleet overfished the rest of the fish, and the fishery was closed. That's the story. This Canadian experience can be generalized throughout the world. That's what happens. That stocks that have been moderately fished, they are fished more and more, and then they go down the tube. And that can be represented. FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, has represented that in '96. They came up with this graph with the proportion of stock that are in different categories. And usually people read these stocks, this is graph vertically. So in 1980, you can read about 40% of the stock were developing, and 20%, 30% were fully developed, and the rest was whatever. The point is, people read this vertically, and most people, they make statements about the percentage of stock that are in various states. But this definition of fully developed or developing and stuff, they don't mean anything because they are different between different authors. These graphs must be read horizontally, where the trend is more or less horizontally. And we simplified these graphs and extended them, and FAO continues to do them, and they have something in common, which is the number of the proportion of stocks that are developing, that are beginning to be fished, so to say, is declining. The number that is fully exploited is also declining, and the number of stocks that are overexploited or collapsed is increasing. That's the famous graphs that have led people to continue to extrapolate to 2048. I didn't do that. Some colleagues did, but it was perfectly legitimate to do it. 10 minutes, I can easily do that. So this can be done in more complicated fashion by colleagues who say Pauly is a doomsday sayer. Actually, we can show that things are more positive. But actually, these people here have the same result, that the stocks, that is a real global analysis, are going down, and that business as usual would continue that with extinction of all stocks by the middle of the century. And they have various alternatives. That's what would happen if we adjusted effort, fishing effort, that is all we do that to catch the fish that we want to do, if they were adjusted such that maximum sustainable yield is obtained from each stock. And this is, if we did additional things called, together, jointly called magic. If you did magic, then this would happen. This is similar to the graphs that people have if we immediately stopped emitting carbon dioxide. Well, yes, if we did that, we would be in Harry Potter's world. And what we have is a situation where actually we have the government, should be, in charge of things. We have a sector that is very well represented in itself. It doesn't need actually scientists to speak for the fishers and the fleet owners. And it has other stakeholders. That is the new thing. There is a resource still, like before, and there is still scientists. But what has changed is that we recognize now the legitimacy of having other stakeholders. Which other stakeholders? Well, the public would like to have fish. The NGO community would like to have the animals protected and not everything annihilated. The turtle lovers, the people who like the ocean not to be totally polluted. These people very often have opposite or different, at least different goals. And when I came to Canada and realized that fishery scientists are not listened to, I realized this is because actually fishery scientists never work with these people. They always work with these people. In fishery science, in classical fishery science, you're not told that the rest of the world exists. You're told that we must help them and we must provide the necessary guidance when we work in government lab. Certainly, this is the only stakeholders that matter. But actually, there's a huge range of other stakeholders, the NGO community, that also matters. What do you do when you work for other stakeholders? For example, you show, and this is a result of work that has been done by several people who are here, actually. We have reconstructed the catch of the world. And the catch of the world is much higher than reported officially. For every country, we estimated what is being caught. Don't ask me why, but it was not magic. It was a lot of hard work. And while the catch of the world is reported by FAO, by the UN, to be approximately 80 million tons a year, actually the catch of the world is more in the order of 130 million tons and declining then toward 110 million tons. And this decline is very marked, and it's actually the result of fisheries expanding as before, but not finding lots of new fish, whereas before, when they expanded, they found new fish. And this expansion, you can present as percentage of the primary production of the production of the sea. Essentially, the sea is like a field of grass, and the plankton in the sea is the grass. And this is the fraction of the grass that is consumed by fisheries. And in the 50s, on coastline, it was, there was already fisheries existing. For example, a strong fishery along the Canadian and New England shelf. But now we have fisheries everywhere. And yes, you have done this map. And this is one picture that I have the time to show you that characterized fisheries, they always expand. And this means that everywhere a phenomenon called fishing down occurs. That is, we concentrate on the big fish, then we go fish the smaller fish, and at the end we have nothing else but a little fish and jellyfish. Now, what is the role of government in this? We could say in this big picture. I'm not talking about the roles of management of governments in managing a stock that is there, the stock of herring in the Georgia Strait, but managing the fisheries as a whole as they expand. Well, one thing that they do is subsidize. And when you end up with subsidies, I will show you a graph that is more science-based, but basically you have too many boats because the subsidy maintain a big fleet, and they don't have fish, so they have to expand, and they bring misery wherever they go, and then they have to be subsidized even more to continue because there is no fish at the end. And this, that is not the way it should look. This is modification by Apple, or what is the computer in latitude? It shows, I promise this is not me. Imagine the graph should go like this. Should go like this and like that. Okay, the graph should go like this. And I would, if it went like that, I would say, you can imagine if you don't fish, that's the amount of fishing you do. You don't catch fish. So if you don't fish, you don't catch fish, there's no problem. And you remember the curve is like this. At the maximum, you fish just right. And you extract what is known as maximum sustainable yield. But what happens if you fish more? Well, if you fish more, you begin to fish to catch less, right? And at some point, you will be stopped by the fact that you just get your cost back in. We can look at that. And in principle, the fishery should stop there. But what in reality happens is that they start screaming and they will want subsidies. But if the fishery is developed, subsidy, by reducing the cost of fishing, reduce the catch. And if the real curve were here, you would see even more decline due to this. If the cost curve goes down, then the catch also goes down. And that is much of the tragedy. Because, and this is really sabotaging my point, all other industries, all other human endeavors, usually when you do more, you get more. And this is not the case for fisheries. If you increase what you think is your input, you actually get less. And all governments are included in participating in this thing that they subsidize the fisheries. So one reason why policy, while scientists are not listened to, is because the message that we have is counterintuitive. It's profoundly counterintuitive. There is, if you do less, you will have more. This is against everything that politicians have learned. It's against everything that engineers learn. This is against everything that agronomists learn. So, if you have a fisheries department, an agricultural department with a fisheries branch, and they tell you something that doesn't make sense, you don't believe them. And if the Minister of Fisheries in India, or in Malaysia, or in the Philippines, or maybe even in Canada, hears there is not enough fish we don't have enough fish, demand is increasing, the population is increasing, the reflex will be, let's have more boats. And these more boats bring only more misery. More misery to the coastal fisheries that are already there, that are already operating. This is the reflex that was in Indonesia when I was there. They had 100,000 fishers already around the Java Sea, and they introduced more boats. They catch more at first, and then they catch less because of this. I would like to know how this was sabotage. Anyway, and if you can do the thing with your little minutes, and so if you don't control this crazy effort, you can end up like the Chinese coastal fisheries have ended, which have hundreds and thousands of boats, trawlers, and that's what they catch. That's what they catch. This is, has no name really, but you could call it slop or glop. This is a mixture of jellyfish, plankton, and little fish. And some people are tempted to say they catch lots of it. that's good. But actually, they can market this, or they can land it only because they have aquaculture department. They have an aquaculture industry where this is an input. But because ducks or pigs or other fish convert badly this glop, there is actually the fish production is underutilized. If half of this quantity were good fish that you can consume directly, they would actually end up with more fish for humans than they actually do. And so, the final point is that why are politicians not listening to scientists? Because scientists, at the end of the day, if they consider all the aspects that have to be considered to make a fishery work, they will consider things like how much is landed for human consumption, how much is discarded, how much is wasted to make fish meal for pigs, how much fuel you use. They would always end up saying small coastal fisheries that we need to have. In many cases, they would end up saying that. But our politicians, I'm afraid so, they don't like to hear that because they want to subsidize large-scale fisheries. DFO says it's because it's easier to manage. But actually, managing a monster fishery, we have seen in Newfoundland, is like riding a tiger. These monster boats are not manageable. They run you, and actually the big fishery, once you have them, in this province we have big fish. We had small fisheries, small-scale fisheries, and it was taken over by Mr. Patterson, who owns half of the fisheries of the country, of the province. Is he running the fishery, or is the DFO running the fishery through Jim Patterson? Actually, the large-scale fisheries, which are preferred by political masters, dominate the agencies that are supposed to run them. And at the end of the day, if I'm to say, why don't they listen to, or why don't they listen to, whether does the minister listen to the owner of big fleet rather than fishery scientists, is because, I would say, because fishery scientists don't play golf. And that will be it, because they gave me only 20 minutes.